back. Before we get to our guest who is getting ready to come on the program where we talk about the peace accord. You know, we started off that conversation around the peace accord. One of the responsibilities those of us who are journalists, all of us right here and our colleagues around the country have is to force these politicians to talk about the issues that matter to Nigerians. And personally, we'll also look at issues, I'm talking about myself now, how elections are rigged. Because I remember, you know, so we're here together. Yeah. Okay, we're here in the morning if I join Bukola in the evening. And during that election, what happened was, especially at a polling unit, I think, is it the governor's polling unit or one of those polling units that were transmitting live, I saw that they were so involved. They were counting every ballot. And then, when it eventually went their way, they were screaming, they ran. I said, no, don't run away. Do not run away. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. Because between you're going to celebrate and coming back, the magic
can happen.
Could have happened by maybe disappearance or one excuse. Because what I advise people now to do at a polling unit, whether you're APC, PDP, whatever party you belong to, is really none of my business. I don't have a dog in this fight. My only is the process. Make sure that when you go to the polling unit and you go to the ballot, when they finish counting, if you people are 100, share yourself, 50, go and be shouting, we won. 50, stay there. And be looking to make sure the agents of the party sign, INEC officials signs, and then make sure they capture it, and show it's been captured and uploaded. Now transmission, if there's if there's network, it will be transmitted. If there's no network, it will just be hanging there until there's network. But make sure it's captured. Don't just jump and run away. That's my own scanning advice. Our guest is ready.
Let's go to our guest.
Okay, let's go to our guest. I have a concern that I'd love to, speak on to respond to that. But the National Peace Committee would have Nigerians know, especially from the signing of the accord yesterday, that it's not just about the destination that they are running to as the campaigns begin, but how they run. Because how they run would perhaps determine how they govern if they're elected. So let's have the reminders this morning about what actually they committed to when they signed the peace accord. And joining us this morning to talk more about the peace accord that was signed yesterday is the project coordinator of the Kukah Center, Asabe Ndahi, joins us from our Abuja studio today, the project manager of the Kukah Center. Mrs. Ndahi, good morning and welcome to the Morning Brief.
Good morning.
It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Yes. One of the things that
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes. One of the things that we noted yesterday at the signing was that the Peace Committee emphasized that this is not just a ritual, but it is anchored on portions of the electoral law that can be invoked should the accord be abused by candidates as campaigns begin. Perhaps there's no better time than now for a reminder to thousands of candidates who are running for presidential, governorship, National Assembly elections, what they committed to and, the consequence of abuse. Perhaps we should start from there.
Okay, thank you very much. So this first signing of the peace accord is to promote issue-based campaign and also to just remind them that they must conduct their campaigns peacefully, devoid of violence, devoid of hate speech and inflammatory rhetoric. Because I would like to take you back to the history of the peace accord. The peace accord actually came into existence in 2014, and this was because of the emotional nature of the campaigns leading up to the 2015 elections. And what we do not want to see is a repeat of that kind of campaign where people just come out and are insulting other politicians. There's no sensitivity as to or respect for the other candidates per se. So we do not want to see a campaign where the spokesperson, for example, where we always see that most of the violations come from the spokespersons of either the party or the candidates. We're reminding them that now the Electoral Act has been refined and there are consequences for all of those acts. So it's not just what I heard somebody say, it's a moral document. It has gone beyond a moral document. It has backing of the law. the Constitution, the Electoral Act, and all other legal frameworks that govern the electoral process. And so we're just reminding them that they must campaign and they must conduct their campaigns responsibly. It doesn't matter who came to sign or did not sign. It matters that the political party was represented. And because we all know that every candidate is a member of the political party. And so the chairman has signed on behalf of the party, and it covers everybody in the political party. So we're just reminding all politicians, particularly their spokesperson, because those are the people who make the comments on their behalf, that they must conduct themselves responsibly. They must make sure that their campaigns do not incite violence. Because what we see at the end of the day, on election day did not start from election day. It always has a history before the incident actually happens.
So I'd like you to also emphasize on the laws that can be invoked if a court is abused by any candidate at any level.
Okay, so I give you an example of the Electoral Act, particularly Section 131. A and B talks about vote trading, and that anybody who is caught in the business of vote trading has a fine to pay. You are either sentenced to 12 months imprisonment or a minimum of 500,000, depending on the case. I also give you Section 96, where if you are found in the business of hate speech or just inciting violence through the rhetorics from your campaign or your spokesperson or from the party in general, there are fines to pay. For the individual, there's a minimum fine of 5 million naira or 12 months in prison. And if it's a political party that is found culpable, you are going to pay the fine of 10 million naira minimum. And for subsequent offenses, you will pay a minimum of 5 million naira. And so all of these are offenses that are not just backed by the Electoral Act, but also in the Constitution, where it guarantees that you have the right to freedom of expression, but that you shouldn't impinge on somebody else's rights. So all of these things are available there, and there are many other things. The entire Section 7 of the Electoral Act of 2026 covers for electoral offenses. It provides all the penalties, and I think that we shouldn't be in ignorance of all of these things, because ignorance of the law is not an excuse.
Some would question whether this same signing which we saw just before the polls in Osun State, if there have been consequences for the words, the threats, the rhetorics that we saw ahead of the elections or the build-up to the elections in Osun State. So some would question, indeed, if something has been done about that. But my question to you will also be that very absent at that National Peace Accord yesterday was the entire ADC as a party. Its presidential candidate was also absent, and no form of representation. So any reasons as to why? And then some would also say that perhaps if Mr. President was also there, President Bola Tinubu, maybe it would have also, because he's the sitting president, perhaps it would have made a whole lot of difference in terms of just ensuring that indeed he leads the way in terms of ensuring there is peace ahead of the polls.
Okay, so I'll start with your first question. Of course, we signed the peace accord in Osun State precisely on the 30th of July, just before the elections. But we want to say that the peace accord is not a magic wand. It doesn't completely exonerate other institutions of their responsibilities. What we do with the peace accord is to remind people that these provisions of the law need to be respected ahead of the elections. But then there's a place for active citizenry. There's a place for political parties. There's a place for the election management body and the security agencies. But what we can tell you with the peace accord was, on the eve of the peace accord, there were arrests made in Osun of the members of the Accord Party. And before that, one of the major issues was also the security sector neutrality. And once we signed the peace accord, at the very high level of the police, the IG deployed an extra commissioner of police to make sure that, okay, these accusations on the police, we need to sort it out. And those were parts of the impact of the peace accord that was signed in Osun, just to make sure that where the highest tension was with the security sector, and they had to do something about it. They had to just readjust whatever they were doing to make sure that they are now seen to be responsible and conducting the elections properly. The second question, the absence of the president. As I mentioned earlier, the APC was represented by the national chairman. ADC was also represented. even though the candidate himself wasn't there and the party chairman was not there, but they were ably represented. And so we want to say that the party has committed, whether in person or collectively as represented by the party chairman. What is important is they are now accountable to the law. And regardless of the signing of the peace accord, the law has always been in existence. All we're doing is setting a reminder so that you did not come to sign the peace accord doesn't mean that the full weight of the law cannot be applied to you. It would have been important for the optics if the president showed up. But regardless, every Nigerian is equal before the law, and with the peace accord, we do not play preferential treatment. All candidates are treated equally. They all sit on the same row, so it's not a matter of this particular candidate is more important than the other.
Let me ask you a direct question, madam. And I'm very glad. Distinguished Nigerians, this looks like just distinguished Nigerians making very honest moral persuasion in a game that lacks any form of morality, both by players and even parties, arguably. So how do you balance that nexus?
So I would like to ask you a question. Can we try the alternative, to do nothing, considering the political risk that we see in Nigeria?
So the point I'm making here is that there is the ground norm, which is our constitution, the biggest law ever.
Yes.
There is the Act of Parliament, which is the next level, called the Electoral Act. And then there are subsidiary laws, which are guidelines by INEC. We have enough. So I am saying that in terms of legislation to check excesses and mischief, we have it in great supply. The question now is, it's a game that lacks morality. So what are the conversations that you think is being pushed through to have an iota of morality in this game?
Okay, well, firstly, the Peace Committee members try to engage in preventive diplomacy. So it's not that we just sign the accord and we just keep it. After signing the accord, we document, and we have at the Kukah Center, Secretariat of the National Peace Committee, the Election Security Information Hub, where we track insecurity that has a tendency to impact on the elections, but we also track electoral offenses. And so with all of this data that we gather, we sit the presidential candidates and the party chairman and other key stakeholders for the elections to say this is what the data is showing, and we have to do something about it. The Peace Committee tries to engage these people at the very high level to make sure that Nigeria is not at the brink of a collapse, it's not deteriorating, and that there's less violence going into the elections. If we recall what Nigerian elections used to look like before the 2015 elections, where the first peace accord was signed, the 2011 elections that was recently concluded before all of that was very violent. We saw at the minimum 800 lives being lost, and we do not want a repeat of that. And so the moral persuasion of the peace, the moral persuasion that the Peace Committee carries out is just to constantly remind these people that the law exists, but they're also appealing to their moral conscience to make sure that they do what is right for Nigerians.
Madam, that's what I'm saying. We're in this together, all of us, because nobody should die because of an election. My ambition, or anybody's ambition, using the classic quote by former President Goodluck Jonathan to make a case. But unfortunately, I'm speaking to the reality that we face. Osun is a classic example. We have the death toll for what? For just a governorship election, an election that will come and pass, and 4 years after, someone is going to come back, another set of elections will come. So is the navigation around a moral persuasion around, forgive me, a game that lacks any form of morality. So should we begin to expand the conversation to say, rather than making moral persuasion in a game by players and parties, arguably that don't have any respect for this morality, with greatest respect, shouldn't we be strengthening institutions, expecting this misbehavior to be handled as enshrined in the law? If you get my drift.
Yes, okay. So as I said earlier, at the signing of the peace accord, we have the Inspector General of Police, whether in person or in a representative capacity, and we have INEC. And so we remind them as well that it's not just about the political actors, it's also about you, the election management body, and the security agencies who have a responsibility to enforce the provisions of the law. That's one. The second thing, hello?
Go ahead,
the
madam.
second thing that we do is to also have other conversations with them to say where are the issues and how can the Peace Committee intervene in all of this. So yes, there is a big need to strengthen institutions, and at the National Peace Committee, the Secretariat level, we also have what we call the accountability framework, where we also monitor the actions or inactions of state institutions to make sure that they are also living up to their responsibilities.
Well, maybe
yes, absolutely. You're right. We need to strengthen institutions, not just the political actors, because as we know, the political actors do not have any form of institution that really regulates them. And so one of the things we've also asked for is that we have also been part of the CLAM, or the Electoral Offences Act, Electoral Offences Commission, where all of these things can now be sent to the Commission to investigate and to enforce the due weight of the law.
So, I mean, they say everything rises and falls in leadership. So I understand why you're doing this. You bring in the leaders of the party and then you try to make them commit. But I wonder if the Kukah Center is also beginning to think of how best to involve the followers who, despite the signing of this National Peace Accord, it dates back to 2014, and it's been signed over and over again. But the followers who were not part of that meeting yesterday, who may not be part of the next phase and the final phase, I wonder if we're beginning to strategize better on how to involve them, in how to make them, those persons at the grassroots, because it takes only one person to say, let's mobilize, let's go, and they're all marching in one direction. So I wonder if perhaps the center is making further efforts on how to engage the followers a bit more to commit as well to peace and a violent-free campaign and elections.
Okay, thank you for that. So the first thing I'd like to say is we saw the optics yesterday, and it wasn't just me and you. The entire Nigeria have seen that the political parties have come together, they have signed the peace accord, and they're ready for peace. And so that alone should speak to the mind of any responsible Nigerian to not go ahead and carry out violence on behalf of these people because they have agreed for peace. And it's also the responsibility of those who have signed to go back to their followers, to go back to their party members to say there is no need for violence. Everybody has a responsibility in this equation. But finally, I'd like to say that the Kukah Center, we're just coming back from Moshogbo, and we had been there for 5-week stretch. We were having several stakeholder engagements, including socialization of the peace accord with the party chairman and the candidates ahead of the signing, so that they understand the actual content of the peace accord, and when they're making commitments, they know what they're signing to. We also had bilateral engagements with several stakeholder groups, including traditional and religious leaders, the media, CSOs, all of the people who participate in election. And we're planning to do so with the national elections. It's not an easy feat because it's 36 states now, not just Osun, but the Kukah Center will not relent on its oars. It will continue to make sure that we have a lot of grassroots engagement to make sure that people understand that the peace accord has been signed, there is no need for violence, and elections will come and go, Nigeria must remain, and so we must all conduct ourselves responsibly, whether as followers or just as party members or just any part of the electoral equation that you find yourself.
And that brings me to the next question. And in putting it in context, I'd like to walk down memory lane. We all remember the dog and the baboon comment credited to former president, late Muhammadu Buhari, and where it led us in terms of post-election violence in 2012. Fast forward to 2023, in Lagos, there was hate rhetoric invoked against non-indigens who chose to vote a candidate of their choice, and we saw some form of election violence perpetrated. There was no consequence for that. Now, ahead of the 2027 election, knowing that these laws have always been there, documented, it's not a lack of laws that is the challenge, perhaps the surfeit of laws and the failure oftentimes to invoke these laws when they have been breached. And so who should we be looking to invoke these laws and ensure the prosecution of those who breach the law, regardless of who they are ahead of 2027?
Okay, so I'd like to first say that in the aftermath of the 2023 elections, with what happened in Lagos, the Kukah Center organized a project, an intervention, to strengthen social cohesion in Lagos State post the elections, because we saw everything that happened. And we do not want to go into the 2027 elections with that sort of story. But as for who will enforce the law, the position hasn't changed. The security agencies have a responsibility to ensure the safety of the entire country, the electorate, whoever comes out to vote on election day, regardless of your location. You are supposed to be guaranteed some form of safety by the security agencies. So yes, everybody has a responsibility. But what we know is that we ought to have picked up the lessons from the 2023 elections, and to make sure that we're learning from history and not repeating our mistakes. And so we're hoping that the 2027 elections in states like Lagos and other volatile places will be peaceful, and then voters will be safe. But we have done our part. We engaged different stakeholders, particularly the youth, but other critical stakeholders in Lagos State, to ensure that social cohesion is real in Lagos State, because it is a place with a lot of diversity, and we cannot just ignore the realities that are in Lagos State.
All right, that would be a fine place to anchor it, and hope that, all institutions responsible for upholding the law ahead of the 2027 elections to align with the peace accord will do just that. And we've been talking with Asabe Ndahi. She's the project manager, the Kukah Center. Thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you very much.
We'll take a moment now. When we return, we're done just yet with how the campaigns will play out. We'll be back in just a moment with more. Stay with us.